Welcome. My name is Lida Anestidou. I was the study director for the recently finished update of the Guide for the Care and Use of Laboratory Animals. As you know, this 8th edition was released in December 2010, and we are now approaching the time when the US government, via the Office of Laboratory Animal Welfare, is going to make a decision as to how it's going to adopt this document and how this is going to affect the research community. The committee who wrote this new edition would like to make some comments that they believe may be useful as this process is coming to an end. In order for them to do that, we invited here the chair of the committee, Dr. Janet Garber, who will, after I'm done, speak to you and read some of the most pressing concerns that this committee has, with the idea that the research community would like to hear from the committee once before the final decision is made. So thank you for your time. It's going to be a short video from here on, about 5 minutes, and I appreciate your concern and your interest in ILAR and the guide. Thank you.
The committee received overwhelming support by the community and by its sponsors for the concept of performance standards. There were also many comments on the absence of information in the 1996 guide on how best to achieve performance goals. As stated in the preface and throughout the new document, the recommendations should be used as a foundation for the development of a comprehensive program, recognizing that the concept and application of performance standards in accordance with goals, outcomes, and considerations defined in the guide is essential. The concept of performance standards is carried out through every chapter with goal-oriented recommendations. Much of the expanded text in the updated guide reflects additional published information and standards of practice that may form the basis for making decisions regarding the achievement of desired outcomes. Because of the vast range of institutional needs and settings, the guide is written in broad statements of achievable outcomes, performance standards, and is largely devoid of specific engineering standards. This to enable each institution, research facility, to create customized policies and procedures within the context of the recommendations that are provided. Recommendations in the guide, whether expressed as numbers, approaches, or general outcomes, are recommendations based on published data, scientific principles, expert opinion, and current standards of practice. The final document represents a balanced approach, optimizing animal care and use programs and institutional practices and current standards of practice, with strong emphasis on performance standards and humane care. Wording throughout was very carefully considered by the committee and should be read and interpreted as it is written. For that reason, we are surprised that some readers of the 8th edition have chosen to make interpretations that do not coincide with what is written. One issue appears to have generated the most controversy: space recommendations, particularly for breeding rodents. Nowhere else in the guide is the concept of performance standards expressed to the extent that it is in the section on housing. Precise space requirements cannot be scientifically determined for any species, as they depend on many factors, including strain, sex, age, enrichment, and animal use. For this reason, the committee left the numbers provided in the previous edition's space tables essentially unaltered. Instead, emphasis was placed on performance standards that are specified in the text and that are critical for interpreting the numbers in the tables. In the section General Considerations for All Animals, several statements enforce the importance of considering performance criteria when determining space needs. Statements include the recognition that animals' space needs are complex and that there is no ideal formula for calculating an animal's space needs based only on body size or weight. It is recommended that space allocations be assessed, reviewed, and modified as necessary by the institution's Animal Care and Use Committee, considering performance indices. The tables, as in past editions of the guide, provide recommended minimum space for laboratory animals. In response to comments received, new additions to the tables are the added comments and footnotes that specifically emphasize the importance of performance standards when determining space needs of animals. All tables indicate that the interpretation of the tables should take into consideration the performance indices described in the text. I'd like to provide some specific comments regarding the addition of recommendations for rodent breeding. Previous editions of the guide provided no guidance on housing for rodent breeding. The committee, therefore, provided recommended minimum space for a female rat or mouse with her litter as a starting point for rodent breeding situations. This based on conservative estimates and current standards of practice across laboratory animal facilities. The committee intentionally did not add specific additional engineering standards for other breeding configurations to allow institutions to determine the appropriate housing conditions for their own situations based on performance indices discussed throughout the document. To emphasize this, comments and footnotes specific to rodent breeding were included in the tables. For example, other breeding configurations may require more space and will depend on considerations such as number of adults and litters and size and age of the litters. This comment is followed by the added footnote specifically that provides other considerations in determining space needs for breeding rodents. The guide does not suggest that the minimum space recommendations for like-sized group house rodents be used in further calculating the space needed for other breeding configurations, although they may be helpful in decisions related to space. What the guide does say is that other breeding configurations may need more space based on performance indices, and then goes on to list things to consider in making that determination. It does not require or even suggest that other space recommendations in the table be used as part of this determination. Using the performance standard approach, changes in current housing practices may or may not be needed as determined by the institution's Animal Care and Use Committee. In summary, the challenge for institutions will be to critically review all aspects of their program, including housing, in the context of the updated guide. Many of the changes reflected in the 8th edition have already been implemented in institutional programs. Others will require thoughtful discussion amongst all those involved in the institutional Animal Care and Use program to fully implement.